ISO 27001 Annex A 5.26 response to information security incidents. So the last couple of tutorials, we've been going through incident management, right? It puts a lot of emphasis on that, and rightly so, and it narrows down. This is looking at the response. How do we respond to those incidents? It goes on the premise that you've watched the guides and tutorials. We have that incident management process in place and it is defined. We have roles that are already defined, and we have our assessment of events so that we understand when events become incidents. This is looking at particularly about how we respond to those. So there isn't that much to go through in terms of this particular clause standalone. It is in the context of incident management. Let's have a look at what the standard is looking for so we know how to implement it. Information security incidents should be responded to in accordance with the documented procedures. So there's not a lot to go at, right? If you were coming at this clause cold, because what it's saying is in the previous tutorials, you have to have a documented incident management process. And in that documented incident management process, you've documented how to respond. Is it pointless as a standalone annex? You know, maybe. As I've said before, the standard itself likes to pad, right? It likes to give you the same thing over and over again, or it likes to give you things it doesn't need to give you, and it kind of over eggs it. But on the basis of that, this is quite an easy one for us to satisfy, right? So what we're looking at is how we're going to respond to the events. So let's have a look at some principles. If you haven't written your response yet, or you've written it and you want some guidance, what are some of the principles that we should be included in our response to information security incidents? So we're looking at things like containment, stopping the incident from spreading. We're looking at evidence collection, collecting evidence of what happened. A second caveat, you know, second time I've talked about this caveat, how you collect the evidence, right? How you deal with, you know, artifacts within that environment in an incident are going to be driven by whether or not it's going to result in a HR disciplinary process or a legal process, because if it does, then the way that you go around it is going to be significantly different. So within your process, I would distinguish between the two, right? And again, there's guides and blogs on that. We will come to that, you know, significant incidents, but for now, you're going to collect your evidence. The principle within your process is about escalation. So considering and acting on escalation as required, which may mean invoking business continuity. I don't think we've got to business continuity yet, but when we get to business continuity, disaster recovery, the point that you invoke DR, the point that you invoke BCP is usually driven by incident management. It is a decision step within incident management, i.e. a system has become unavailable, and the response to that as part of incident management is to invoke DR or BCP. So we'll touch more on BCP and DR when we get to those particular annexes in a little while. Principles to include in the process, things like communicating, telling people about the processes so they know what's expected and what to do, you know, training on that, getting people on the same page with that. Then as part of the response, what communication is it that you need to put in place? What are you communicating to staff? What are you communicating externally? What are you communicating to customers? How, when, what? So think about the communication as part of your response process. Obviously, we're baking into that process sharing knowledge, right? So we want to share knowledge when an incident occurs, and we need to understand who we're going to share that knowledge with. So that's part of communicating. If our incident is going to have a knock-on impact, we're going to share that. And it may well be actually that we want to provide to the wider community, you know, a public version of the incident. We don't want to talk about details specific to us if it will help the wider community. It might be something that's occurred that we think that people would benefit from knowing about, so it wouldn't happen to them. So there'll be levels of sharing of knowledge, all the way from super high level, maybe more detailed if you've got partners, business partners, technological partners that you want to share that knowledge with. Slightly different to communicating, but under the communicating umbrella. In that process, we need to talk about closing, and we need to talk about root cause. So closing is, how do you close down the incident? At what point is the incident no longer an incident? And how do you recover from that? Again, this is going to come into business continuity specifically, because a business continuity invokes something that ultimately gets backed out to return to business as usual. It is unlikely and unusual for a business continuity disaster recovery to become the norm, right? It is a stopgap to get you over a particular hurdle. It's about getting you up and running, and then at some point you're going to recover back to normal operation. So closing of incidents, how you close them, how you recover back, needs to be considered about that as part of that response. And clearly, root cause is going to be baked in when we've talked before about continual improvement. We've talked about, moving forward. How do we improve as an organization? One of the ways that we do that is to understand what the root cause was. So even if the incident management is to tackle the symptoms of something, ultimately we want to tackle the root cause of that so it doesn't happen again. We can recover from an incident, but the incident may reoccur. By doing root cause analysis, we can understand exactly what the issue was and tackle the root cause of it so that it doesn't occur again in the future. So 3 steps really in incident response. There's identification, there's assessment, and there's the response itself. So they're the things that we're going to be looking at when we're responding to events. So a relatively easy one. Again, if you have incident management professionals, you're going to rely on them. If you have an existing information and incident management process, you're going to rely on that. And if you don't, you're going to take consideration to what I've just provided to you and implement your own response to information security incidents. That was ISO 27001 Annex A 5.26, response to incident information security incidents. And I absolutely remain Stuart Barker, the ISO 27001 Ninja, online guru, and most of you have probably watched more hours of this than you've spent with your wife this month. So until the next tutorial, peace out.